Dr. Bach, we all know that the Stuart period witnessed the most intense religious and political struggles in the English history. And one of the most significant consequences is the shift of power from the monarch to the parliament. So I was wondering, how do you think the Stuart monarchs contribute to this transformation?
Well, they're very different personalities, the Stuart monarchs.
Yes.
I mean, James I is a man who believes in the royal prerogative. He actually wrote about divine right.
He wrote about that.
He wrote about that, books about that. And but when he was in power, he was politically very astute, and one of the main conflicts that exists between kings and parliament at this time are over finance. And James was short of money, was always short of money. There was a proposal by Robert Cecil called the Great Contract to make it possible for the king to live off his own, in other words, to have enough money for the expenses of government. It didn't come off. But James was careful when it came to war. The 30 Years' War breaks out in 1618. There's tremendous pressure from Parliament to support the Protestant cause in the war. James is actually rather reluctant to go to war. He sees war as expensive. And he knows that he can't afford it, and it will also make him far more dependent upon Parliament. So I think that although James was by intellectual conviction someone who believed in royal prerogative, in practice he was much more careful. That was not true of his son, Charles. And Charles was, I think, also far more religiously committed to a particular version of Anglicanism, which he and his Archbishop of Canterbury, William Laud, tried to impose not just on England but on Scotland, and that led to the Civil War. When we come to Charles II, I think the one major thing that Charles II was concerned about was to survive. He lived in the shadow of what had happened to his father. And although Charles II was probably privately, intellectually convinced that prerogative monarchy was just and right, he was very careful in the way in which he treated political opposition. And when he came to power in the Declaration of Breda, he makes a commitment to religious toleration, which actually goes further than his ministers and his parliaments were eventually prepared to allow. Charles, interestingly, his own religious convictions were Catholic. His mother was a Roman Catholic, and he himself became a Roman Catholic, but only on his deathbed. Only on his deathbed, because he realized that it was politically explosive to declare his Catholicism during his lifetime. But his brother, who succeeded him, was not so careful. His brother had become a Catholic in the 1660s. James II was a convinced Catholic. He believed that England could return to Catholicism, something which I think he was quite wrong, but he believed that once you removed the penal laws, once you removed the penalties on Catholics, people would turn Catholic. And James, I think, was very foolish in the way in which he pushed his Catholic beliefs in the early years of in his reign, and it ended up with the expulsion of James, or his flight rather, from England in 1688. And so you've got very different personalities here involved. The events of the century, I think, produce a big change. You might put it down mostly to the English Revolution. The fact that a king loses his head in 1649 is something that no successor is ever going to forget. And I think by the end of the period, we have not only a more limited monarchy, we have the beginnings of very significant religious toleration, and we also have a means of finance which is new and which is not totally in the control of the king, which is the Bank of England.
Okay.
And this makes it possible for British governments to raise money on a scale that they'd never done before, and which therefore makes possible the growth of Britain as a great power.
Yes, yes, exactly. That's very informative and insightful. Yes, and speaking of Charles I, okay, I think one of the most dramatic events in English history, or in this period in English history, is the execution of Charles I. So I was wondering, what do you think of this event and think of Charles I? Is he a dictator or is he a martyr?
Well, you can look at it both ways there. You see, Charles himself considered that he was defending the laws and liberties of the English people. He refused to recognize the authority of the court, which condemned him to death. He steadfastly refused to do that. It's quite interesting comparing Charles there to Louis XVI in the French Revolution, where Louis is far more craven towards the French court that is set up and condemns him. Charles believed that a sovereign and a subject were, as he said in his last words on the scaffold, he said they were clean different. You know, subjects have the right to be governed by law, but that doesn't mean that they have a part in government. So Charles does actually believe in the prerogative that he asserts. I think, again, a bit like Nicholas II, the Tsar of Russia. I mean, he himself believed that it was positively wrong to be conceding power to a Duma. He had a God-given duty to rule. But of course, that's not how people who differed in their religious views, in particular from Charles, would see it. They saw Charles and his bishops, and particularly Archbishop Laud, as imposing a dictatorial, ungodly, and above all, crypto-Roman Catholic, secretly Roman Catholic religion upon the country. And I think this religious divide is very, very important. It is that which causes the civil war, the attempt of Charles to impose his particular view about religion on Scotland in 1637 is the trigger which leads to the short and the long Parliament and the Civil War.
Yes, exactly. And for more stories, we are going to explore into the videos. Thank you very much.